Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So, first of all, thanks for coming on a Friday morning at 9. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all. The truly devoted are crazy. We thank you.
So, I am Narayanan Lakshmanan. People call me Nana. You can find that in my Twitter handle. I'm an engineering manager with the DSC team, and I've been with PowerShell for a little over 9 years now, so done a lot of remoting, workflows, and now DSC. And with me I have...
I'm Ken Hansen, or Kenneth Hansen, been with Microsoft too many years. And started out with Monad and the requirement stock there, so it's been quite a journey here between PowerShell and we're headed now with DSC and the gallery and other things. We're really excited actually to be here today. Before I talk about us, I'm going to talk about, for like 2 seconds, the world around us. Now, I had some gorgeous slides, but they got ripped out for copyright, so sorry. You get to deal with this. There was a world before automation, and it still exists, but it's disappearing. Don't be a part of the disappearing world. That's why I call this one the IT Pro evolution, right? It is going away. If you don't control your computers, they'll control you, and you don't want to be where they want to take you. The photo here was of somebody just in tears or in his computer, smoking and so forth, okay? So you can picture that for yourself. The next stage, people get to some automation. That's really an important step, but there you're still pretty frantically working to try to stay ahead of the curve, keep doing that. Of course, the best place you want to get to is this world of PowerShell. Now, how many of you write PowerShell? Thank heavens, family and friends. How many of you have written a desired state configuration resource? Good. By the end of next week, there should be many more of you who are raising your hands, okay? We'll show you how to do that today. Take it as like a homework assignment to go ahead and do it. For those of you who have written a DSC resource, also before, how many of you have actually consumed a DSC resource, gone to the gallery, brought it down from somebody else and used it? All right, a little more, that's good. And how many of you have written a configuration? Same about number, there you are, okay. Definitely, we should fix this by next week. Now, I'll even show you a very simple one to get started with. So the next step beyond PowerShell is to get to PowerShell desired state configuration, and I'll show you in the next 5 minutes why I think that's so, but it truly simplifies life as an IT admin. I got to just describe the photo I actually used here because I kind of liked it. It had this guy kicking back, sleeping in front of his computer because it was taking care of it for him, okay? That's the world you want to get to. Your evolution is to take a nap. Once you've done all the hard work of writing the DSC resources, publish them, and that small stuff. And then once you've done that, you should learn how to share with the rest of the world because that's really where you start to actually bootstrap your real expertise. Don't avoid the community. Get deeply, deeply, deeply involved. We find time and time again as we have these PowerShell summits and user groups that those who are deeply immersed in the community become far, far better at their professions and do better financially and interpersonally. So do not avoid the community. Do participate. It will actually improve your career, and I think you'll enjoy it more. There's just a lot of really great people out there. All of you are doing PowerShell. You're a great group, so if you leave this room, maybe you want to turn to somebody you don't know and introduce yourself. They might know something you don't. So get involved. All right, enough of that. Code. All right, so this is one of my favorite sequences I like to go through. And it's just the basic PowerShell progression. This is the world before PowerShell. This is VB script. Any of you ever done VB script? Yeah. You remember that world? Yeah, we used to get these things. Well, I know I should learn this PowerShell thing, but I currently do everything VB script. This is to create an SMB share with permission. That's what VB script looks like. It really does it. Honest to God, I swear. This is the PowerShell. And that's the PowerShell without commandlets. Okay, so that's it's a better world. It still is not good, right? And this is obvious to you guys who've used it. Now we get to this thing called a commandlet. Right? Familiar with those? You like commandlets? Thank you.
Yes, the VB script.
Yes, the VB script. Now, here's the trick. Here's the cool thing about commandlets is You see how it's sort of highlighted, that IntelliSense? What that means is, and you know this, but I'm just going to repeat it because it's going to be important a little bit, is that there's metadata. There's stuff that tells us about that commandlet, right? So anybody can look at this and do this analysis. You can even have this great little add-on come up here that says, oh, you know, where's my new, or actually, let's say I just want to do something with SMB share. Oh, there we are. I can select a new. It'll come up eventually, show me details. I could fill out the GUI, right? I don't have to know a lot to use this. This is a hell of a lot better than that, right? You got me? All right, now here's where I'm landing at this point. Is the problem is that as beautiful as this world is, it's not reality. We have tons of commandlets, but as soon as you put this thing into production, you have to worry about error handling, special cases. As soon as you try to automate, now this is a lot better than what it was, I'm not disagreeing with that, but it doesn't take you to where you need to go, and that's why I'm saying the progression can't stop. This is what the real world looks like even with commandlets. This is what a real world, fully automated, create this SMB share with all the error handling, contains key, full access, blah, blah, blah. Oh my Lord, I'm back up to 95 lines. I thought I got rid of that when I left VB. I didn't, okay? We just made the world a lot better. This same functionality is you're able to describe in DSC that way. That's why I'm saying it's the next step in PowerShell evolution. That's all you have to say. You just have to say, hey, I want to make sure that this share is present, that Jeffrey Snover has access. I don't know why we gave him access. That's just dangerous. Anyway, we're going to give it to Angel. He's our engineering director, to Nana maybe next time. So, but anyway, Jeffrey's got it for today. And this could just be a comma-separated list or whatever. It doesn't matter. My point is that that's the way you want to operate your life, right? Say the world the way you want to be. And I'm probably preaching to the converted. That's probably why you're here. But I really want to land that point because you're going to have to go and tell everybody else around you, don't you? In the end, you guys act as the evangelists in your own group. So just take these points home and make sure you land them for other people around you, okay? That's the world you want to get to. And then you want to take this and share it with other people so they can start utilizing it, and they'll share back with you. That's the basic, what I call the PowerShell progression. The IT pro needs to evolve. We're trying to evolve with them. We're trying to go ahead and keep moving forward. And we'll keep moving forward. Just come forward with us. Okay, so here's the basic overview. I know I've spent a couple of minutes, about 8, I guess the clock tells me, sort of giving you that sense. We're going to go through a brief DSC overview. Since many of you have not written a configuration, we will go a little deeper into how to write a configuration. We'll describe kind of how the architecture is inside of DSC and sort of the separation of the intent versus the actual, making it so part. And then we'll drill into how do you describe your intent real well in configuration, how do you create the make it so part in terms of DSC resources. Okay, and this I'm just going to blow through. Just want you to keep in mind, there's a key takeaway here which simply says that because we have PowerShell combined with desired state configuration, we have now created a configuration as code technology, which is enabling technology in order to achieve a DevOps-like cultural change. Achieving DevOps-like cultural changes layered over a product like desired state configuration will allow you to move into the cloud. And without it, it's going to be much, much, much harder. These technologies enable you to do something you haven't done before, to move to the cloud at scale and with reasonable agility. If you go back to this slide, here, blah, 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 there it is. Right, how much easier is this thing to edit than that VB script or even the PowerShell full script, right? If you just had to go in and change one thing, you can change this. And in fact, if you code it right, you won't even be changing this in line like this. You'll actually take in a variable, because this is just a simple PowerShell function. You would take in a variable here, you would pass it down, it would probably be a CSV file you just passed in, right? So this idea of being able to separate layers means you just have to make the change where it needs to be made, not somewhere else. So don't, because some of our problems are somebody just screws up right? So minimize the screw-up potential. All right.
So, as we looked at, right, when we write a traditional script, we have all of those things we actually write into a script, right? Logging, error handling, reboot resiliency, what happens if my script fails in between, what happens after reboot. And among all of these things which we repeat over across all the scripts, we also have the real logic, the intent of what we want to do and how we want to get it achieved. Right? That's how we traditionally wrote scripts in PowerShell. Now, in the DSC world, as we saw, we separate the intent out into what we call a configuration. Right? I want to create an SMB share. I want the share to be present. I want Jeffrey to have read access. I want Ian to have full access. That's about it, right? I'm just describing the intent, and that's separated out nicely into a configuration. So you want to create a website, you say, okay, IIS is turned on, port 80 is open, my files are copied, that's about it, right? The intent is described pretty declaratively, and that is what we call the configuration. And then we have resources which are technology specific, right? File is a resource, service is a resource, website, SQL, right? Each of those entities that we want to configure, we call them as resources, and the actual code on how to make it so. The actual code on how do we want to make it so is separated out into resources. And as we will see forward, resource basically has three functions: test, set, and get, right? Test tells me, is the resource in the desired state? Set, if the resource is not in the desired state, set is going to put that into the desired state. It's going to make it so. And get basically gives me what is the current state. So we are going to isolate it for each entity that we want to configure.
So what this means, by the way, which we're kind of alluding to now, we'll get to in detail later, is that in order to implement this DSC resource that you all are going to go home and do next week, you just implement a test, a set, and a get function. And then you've actually got that. If you've written PowerShell, you can write a DSC resource. It's not that hard.
And then everything else in between that is important, but we have been repeating across in all of our PowerShell scripts, is now abstracted out by the DSC engine. It centrally handles all logging, error reporting, reboot resiliency, repeatable automation. Everything else is taken care of by the engine, drastically reducing the amount of code we actually want to write. So we saw DSC separates the intent and the make it so pieces, and the DSC engine ties these things together. Now, when we define the configuration, there are two pieces. It's the what. What defines what we call as the structural configuration, right? That is going to stay the same. I want to create a website. IIS needs to be on. Contents needs to be copied. Port 80 needs to be open. It's going to be the same no matter where I do it. So that's the what piece of it. And then there is the where, which we call the environmental configuration. Which environment do I want to create this configuration in? Is it in my dev machine? Is it in my test machine where typically, the front end and back end are the same? Is it my production servers where we have, high availability and redundancy, etc.? So the where part and the what we kind of separate into structural and environmental configuration.
And this is what begins to enable you to achieve some of that DevOps stuff, right? The fact that you can sort of flow from one environment to the other using the same configuration. You always want the IIS server or you don't, right? You always want this set of services running or you don't. Now, the exact IP address might change. Maybe that goes in a separate data. We have this thing called configuration data that helps you do that, but you can do it however you want. But just keeping those notions separate helps you. The first step is to get to the intent, and then you can even separate within intent, make your life a lot easier.
And then doing it this way means you can configure, your dev environment all the way to your prod the same way. So there's no more of this. There is no more of this. It only works in my machine kind of a syndrome, right? And then there is the how part of it, which are actually the resources, and that it deals with the makes it so. Now, there's an important catch there is it has to do the heavy lifting in an idempotent way. We'll delve into a little more of the details when we write resources, but basically what it guarantees is you redo it over and over again, and there are no changes to the system, and it is not necessary. So now let's look at how to write DSC configuration. So here is a typical workflow for how do you write a configuration, right? You basically start consuming resources from the gallery. Now, you can write your own, but one of the things that we have been doing is when we shipped DSC version 1, we had about 12 resources in box. From then on, we started releasing resources on an experimental basis. we're kind of graduated to a point where we have now open sourced all of our resources, and from there on, we periodically take contributions, stabilize them, and publish them onto a gallery, like the PowerShell gallery. So you just go in there.
What the hell?
I don't know.
We have a timing problem. Keep going.
So we basically consume the resources from the gallery, and then you develop your configuration, do what you want to do. And a configuration is also a shareable artifact. So you can put it into a module, publish it back to the gallery for somebody else to consume. So now let's look at how to write and actually use a configuration.
All right, this whole resource and gallery thing. So resources are PowerShell modules, right? And so as you might suspect, we've written a commandlet called find module. And what find module does is it goes out to the gallery. In this case, Nana has a local gallery, and actually pops up exactly all the stuff you got. So now you've got all these modules currently available. There's some 200. 200 now? We up to 2 something?
Yeah, 200.
200 on the general gallery, and you can just browse them as you wish and start to use them. Some of these will be desired state configuration resources, almost all of them today, and then over time we'll have normal PowerShell modules also for you to share and to return. Now, what Nana said, I don't want to skip too much, we'll hit it at the end, because we actually have a way for you to participate in not only publishing to the gallery, but also contributing to specific resources, because we've begun to open source all the resources you'll see today. So if you don't like them, fix them, right? Create a pull request, we'll look at it, we'll suck them back in. Within hours of us putting this up, this is what's great about you guys, our community, within hours of us putting these, we didn't tell anybody, we just put them up because we were sort of opening it up on GitHub, we had hundreds of lines of code already contributed. Completely transformed a few of the resources. We ended up approving the pull request. Then we sort of came back and said, oh, we got to get this version thing a little bit better. A few minutes later, that was fixed, right? So that's the power of the community. It's what you and we can do together. We can provide the place, and you guys just provide awesome results for us. So find module, not hard, huh?
The other thing to note here is, as you see, I'm actually using a local gallery. So you can consume resources from a public gallery. You can set up your own, and you will be able to consume from that. You can consume from multiple galleries. All of them are possible.
All right, so find module. What else can I do with this thing? Well, I can do a name, right? And here, will this work? Yes, there you are. Okay, I have a WordPress resource. I have wildcards. Life is good. Woo! Right? On top of that, because they're modules, now this really should work, you can do a filter. And filter says, I want to take some of those properties that you've input into your Microsoft module manifest, and I can actually filter off those. If you want all of them that are produced by Microsoft, you can go ahead and do that. You with me? So, minimally, now this is available in the April WMF that we just put out. WMF 5.0 preview April 2015. I think that's the official term. Don't forget it. And it takes like 10 minutes to install. I did it just the other night. I had a new laptop. I installed it, and it all just worked. Went right against the gallery, and that's all I did. I just said find module. It's not that hard. You can also do a find-DSC resource. I think there you are. And if I want a name of what do we want to use? We want to use something like the X website. I think what it was. X website, something like that. There you are, right? And so that exists. In fact, what's cool about this is now that I'm here, you see I've got this DSC resource as well. I've said find module or find DSC resource. And now I have this module name. I know what the module name is that I want to go for, right? Get back here. All right. Then what I can do is I can do install module X web administrate. Good Lord. I need tab completion on this. I'm missing an S, aren't I?
Yeah.
Administration. Very good. And let's do this verbose. Make sure this actually works. Right? And it's going to go ahead and download and install it. If it's already installed, it just skips it. It recognizes, okay, you don't need to do that. You can do an uninstall if you want to. Right? So it's pretty simple. Find module, install module. And now you're up and running. You've got a DSC resource to play with.
So now, let's use the resources that we find from the gallery and actually try to write a configuration, right? And so the first thing is we find the resource we want to use, we install it, and let's start writing one. So how do we actually write a configuration? Use the configuration keyword, give it a name, and that's it. You've started writing a configuration. Now, configurations are like functions, so you can have parameters, you can have help, you can have everything that a function does. And the other important statement to look at in a configuration is the node statement. So node basically tells you which nodes or which systems you want the configuration to be applied. So I say in this case node localhost.
And this is a list, by the way, right?
Yeah, so I can have two
So you
computers
could have
here.
n of these. If you want the same configuration applied against thousands of servers, just put 1,000 in there.
Yep.
It'll take care of it.
And then you start specifying your resources. Now, you also have tab complete. So I'm going to use Windows feature, give it a name. So the name of the feature is web-server, and you want to ensure that this is present. So this is how you start writing a configuration. So there is a configuration keyword, and then the list of nodes in which you want the configuration applied, and then the set of resources. Now let's say I want to copy a set of files once IIS is turned on, like I want to copy my website contents. So then what we do is we say file F. We are going to specify all of the properties, but one important thing to note here is I want to only copy the files if IIS is successfully installed. So therefore, I'm going to do a depends on, and you're going to specify what type it is here. So it is of type Windows feature and the name. So what this means is this resource is dependent on the one that I have specified and will only get configured if the previous one succeeds. So for whatever reason, if the previous one fails, it doesn't get executed. And then DSC is going to keep trying it over and over again, and whenever the dependency is satisfied, that resource gets configured. So
right, because DSC keeps, I'm going to hit that point for a second. Because DSC is idempotent, we run it and run it and run it and run it. When we first introduced it a couple of years ago, I was at Europe with Jeffrey, and we actually had one of our machines die on us right in the middle of the presentation, right? And so he's over here doing hand puppets. And I just went back and started rerunning the DSC configuration that built the machine in the first place. And within 10 or 15 minutes, this thing actually sort of rebuilt itself, right? There was something screwed up about the hardware. It didn't matter. It's sort of, okay, it was flaky, it came back, okay, it came back. It never tries, never stops trying until you tell it to. But eventually you sort of succeed. That idea of convergence really helps in the real world.
And the other important point I want to nail, because you can really go wrong if you don't follow this. If you don't have a depends on, and one follows the other, doesn't necessarily guarantee that it will get executed in that order. So if you really want the files to be copied after IIS is installed, use a depends on. Like it may work. There are a lot of scenarios in which case it will not work. So implicit ordering does not necessarily mean the ordering is guaranteed when things execute. That is something to keep in mind. So I have already written a full configuration here, just for saving time. So as you can see, you can write help. It has a set of parameters. So one of the important statements that I missed out is if you're using any third-party resources, things that you download from the gallery, you got to use the import DSC resource statement, and you got to specify from which module you are going to import those resources. And then you have the node. So as you can see, $node name can be a variable. It can take a list of nodes. And then we have...
Go back up a little bit. You take it in, right? Yeah, right here, for example, right? So again, you just pass in a CSV file of all the nodes you actually want to apply this configuration to, and wham, you're done. All done. It's real simple.
And then I have here a full configuration that sets up a website. So now, how do we invoke this configuration? So the first thing is a configuration is like a function. So you define it, and then it's like invoking a function. So I invoke this, and at the end of it, you see that it produces an intermediate MOF document. So basically what this has is, this has It produces a MOF document per node. So if there are a list of nodes that I specify, there will be like one MOF document per node that specifies what is going to be the configuration for that node.
You never have to look at those unless something goes south.
And this
the good news is they're there if you want to.
Yeah, this is a warning that we just recently added. So in the first version of DSC, you can consume everything that we shipped in box without an import statement. Now we are encouraging people to use, so you actually know from which module your resources come in. Nothing to worry about for now. So once I have this MOF document, then we have a commandlet called start DSC configuration, which will take a path to where your MOF files are stored, and it's going to invoke the configuration against the specified node. So I'm going to do that. And here is the interesting thing to look at. So here is my configuration runs, and it goes through each of the resources that we have, and first does a test. So the first resource that I have is IIS Windows feature, and it does a test, and you see IIS is already installed, therefore it is going to skip set. So we first call test. Test should return a true or a false. Is the resource in the desired state? I want IIS present. Is it present or not? Because the resource returns true, DSC skips calling set on it because it's already installed. Whereas you go down, now it is calling test on the file contents, and the file contents are not there, and therefore it calls the set on it and copies all the files. So now what happens is, if I go back and rerun the same configuration, it's going to see all of the resources are configured, so it basically calls skip, 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 skip.
And it happens in under a second, right? That's the whole point. Just boom, boom, boom. You can run these, you can run these. They're safe to run. That's the point. Run it again, run it again. You don't normally do that with your script. You do it DSC. Just run it, run it, run it. Life will be good.
So your script can fail at any point. You can reboot at any point. Something can go wrong. You always start at the beginning. When things are configured, DSC skips and it goes forward. That's what makes this model very simple. I mean, if you had ever written a workflow and you want a checkpoint and then resume, has anybody done that here? Workflows? Okay, few. Yeah. So now anybody can resume from any point because this model makes it very simple, right? You always start in the beginning, you go through, and then if things are not configured, you set them, otherwise you just skip. So that's the key.
And this goes back to just leveraging that engine, right? You're writing the intent. The engine itself is being leveraged to do all this regular stuff for us. And then a number of people are writing the resources, which again are done in a regular way, just like a commandlet, so they can be shared and other people can use them. And then now we're publishing them up on the gallery and making them open.
So here are some high-level best practices, as you can see, on how to author configurations. We already spoke about depends on. There is a way to separate the where from the what. As you can see, you can, for example, take a variable that contains a list of nodes. So that's one way of separation. There's also another way called configuration data. We're not going to go into it, but when we publish the samples, you can go and take a look at them. They should have it. And there are quite a few. We'll just leave it as a reference when you look at the slides back in the interest of time. So now let's look at the components and phases that we just went through, right? So there is the authoring phase, where we actually author the configuration in PowerShell. You can also actually author it in third-party language if you want, because what we end up doing is we create this intermediate MOF document, which is what we end up applying to the node. So PowerShell is actually one way to generate the MOF document, but there are other ways through which you can generate one, and we'll totally work with it. And then once we generate the MOF document, we stage it, right? It basically goes into a folder in this case, so we call it the staging phase. And from then on, we take that and we apply it to the actual nodes to configure them the way we want. Now, what we looked at in the example is what we call as the push model, right? So we write the configuration, we compile it into the MOF, and then from there on, we push that onto the node using a commandlet. So the start DSC configuration basically takes the MOF and pushes it on to the DSC agent or the DSC engine on the other side. There's also something called as the pull model, where you can compile the MOF and you can actually stage them and set up a pull server and deliver the MOF documents onto the pull server. And each of the nodes can be configured to go and pull down the configuration from the pull server. If you want to learn more about how to actually set up a pull server, please visit our blog, blogs.msdn.com/PowerShell, and we have a nicely written article there that will walk you through how to set up a pull server and how to use one, in case you're interested.
Now, just before we go on, let me just nail this a little bit. Because we've talked a lot about desired state configuration, we've showed you the syntax and how to write a configuration. All that is important and very useful. It also turns out, because we have this notion of the DSC resource, we're creating an ecosystem just like we did with the commandlets. And so there will be some companies that actually drill past, I need a pointer, that actually drill past the authoring and possibly even the staging phase and go directly against the DSC engine and invoke those DSC resources, right? So those resources you write, those resources you consume might be consumed by PowerShell or also by other third-party tools. Right now, the one that's done the most work in that area is Chef, right? And they've gone ahead and layered directly over it. When they manage Windows, they're doing it all through DSC. You just don't necessarily see the script. They actually have 2 or 3 ways you can import, the actual configuration itself directly, or you can call more directly or syntax, right? So you have this wonderful world when you start creating this ecosystem that actually grows and grows and grows. And so our expectation is, in fact, we'll have more and more DSC resources, obviously over the next year or 2 or 3, but it'll continue just to grow because you have a whole tooling system layered on top of them. You can take advantage either with the configuration keyword in PowerShell, or tools layered over resources directly, or tools layered over the PowerShell syntax. Just start playing in that space. You'll find a lot of goodness there. The other thing kind of worth noting, and here we've taken, now what Nana showed was kind of a system view, what I'd call a system view of the, you're going to bring it up for us, of the configuration, which says I got a bunch of nodes, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you what each node should look like, and those nodes are identical, I've now described. It turns out the DSC, because it's built into the PowerShell language, is actually flexible. You can begin to, therefore, specify your configurations in ways that should fit within your business processes. And what that means is, for example, instead of saying on a per node basis, you could actually say, hey, I'm not going to necessarily take a system view of it. Here's what each machine wants to look like. I want to look at things more in stripes. I want to make sure that all machines have this set of services, this set of process, this set of firewall rules, and somebody else will say, oh, and I'm going to apply only, this one's going to be a web server, and this one's going to be a SQL database, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. You can actually take a service, more horizontal layered approach to it if you want to, too. You do that in 2 ways. You can do that with, composite configurations, which we probably won't get a chance to drill into today, but what that means is once you've written that configuration with the parameters, just like Nana showed you, that web one that he invoked, that can now be used by a higher level configuration. So you could have one configuration that handles all your firewall rules, another configuration that handles all of your files or services or whatever else you want. Are you with me? So get started, play with it, and then realize that, in fact, you can let the system conform to your good business practices that make sense to you. You don't actually have to twist everything around. The other thing worth noting is, and I just talked about this a little bit, is as well, we've actually enabled this thing called partial configurations. This came up in the very first ILL we did 2 years ago. As soon as we finished, the guy says, well, that's great, but one guy runs this part of my org, the other guy runs the AD part of the org, and this, we have this separation across IT. What partial config does is it says, I'm going to let Angel specify firewall rules because he's passed a bunch of security stuff, right? But Sean, he understands AD, right? So he's going to own all the AD configurations. And then I can set to actually construct metadata that says, Angel's the only one who's allowed to give me firewall rules. Sean's the only one allowed to give me AD rules, and we'll automatically blend them at the target node. Now that's really powerful because now you can, in fact, target them across different target nodes. Whatever each one needs, you can make it mix and match to fit your needs. You with me there? The idea of partial configurations, it's only in WMF 5.0 preview. I think we finally landed it in the April. It's not really there strong. It's there, but not strongly. In the February release, you want to get to the April one in order to use the PowerShell config preview. But again, once you get started, you can start pulling on that thread a little bit. Once you start operationalizing, PowerShell config will come to your rescue anytime you have separation. And by the way, people do this at different levels, right? It's not just AD or firewall. It could be system level stuff and application layer, right? Here's my application layer. Here's the stuff we want across all OSs. So think about your org. Think about how you want to let them give you configurations over time as you start to grow this. The other thing worth noting, this is on a slightly different pivot, is this notion called proxy configurations. We don't do a lot to help you here. We have many ideas on how to help you, but we don't do as much as we want. But you can do this today still yourself. And what that means is not everything will have DSC on it. Can you believe that? It's just true. I don't know why. But anyway, not everything will have installed it. But because you're running PowerShell underneath, you can write, in fact, a resource that handles the remoting for you. And that sounds trivial, but it turns out to be really important because now you can start to manage any of your networking devices or other Linux-based systems all from one place, from one set of configurations in a very simplified way. In fact, we're having a number of people actually drill into this now. Or a proxy configuration also could be useful to go against a service, right? If you're running some software service that's got a REST API, PowerShell works really well with REST. Go ahead, handle a REST API. Create that DSC resource and just proxy config. So you don't just have to do it on the machine. I know these are all perhaps a little out there scenarios for some of you, and others of you are going, yeah, I had that problem yesterday, right? So,
yeah, in fact, some of the resources that we have open sourced have these kind of proxy ones that go against Azure and create VMs and things like that. So basically, acts as a proxy talking to the Azure service endpoints, creating VMs, creating storage, so on and so forth. So please feel free to take a look.
Now, since I've gone all the way to the operational practices, it is going to eventually move forward. I swear it is. There it does. However, we can start simple. Now that I've said, here's where you can get to, come all the way back. If you've never done one before, start real simple. Wouldn't it be great to make sure that all services on all your servers in your data center were in the right state? Oops, we don't want to get there yet, right? I need like a DSC for this slide deck. I swear I do. Anyway, so, and this is simple. This is like 5 lines in DSC, right? Just taking a node statement. I think they've got a timing thing on it. Take a configuration. Take a parameter for your nodes, a parameter for your server names, and a parameter for the services you want on and the services you want off. And with 5 lines of DSC, you will never have a system that doesn't have the right set of services running or the right set of services stopped. A few thousand servers, that can be helpful. You don't have to debug them anymore. You can, go to sleep, right? The final stage of evolution. All right. So, again, all services, right state, start there, or do something similar, whatever you want. Let's get to writing the resources finally.
Yep. So here is the general workflow for how do we want to write a resource. Nothing great here. It's a regular software lifecycle workflow. The first point is something that we wanted to emphasize on, right, is you want to model your resource. Before starting to write code, you want to model a resource. Now, it's not very complex, right? Think about if you're writing a configuration and you are using your own resource, what are the set of properties that you would like to define, right? What are the set of properties that you would like to configure or manage? And that's all. That's what is resource modeling, right? Essentially, how your resource is going to look like. This is going in auto timer. How your resource is going to look like and what are the set of properties you want. Now, once you have that defined, then you can actually start writing resources. So how do we write resources? We have a
PowerShell.
Yeah, of course, PowerShell.
Just thought I'd say.
But we have a helper module for that. So you first do find module. It's called XDSC resource designer. So you find that and you make sure that module is installed. And What that module helps you do is it helps you model each of the properties of a resource. So now let's try modeling like a service resource, right? A service has a name, it has a state. We either want it to be running or stop, and we want to set up maybe the startup type, whether it is automatic, manual, or disabled. And then every service has a description. It will be nice to read what it does so we can understand. So how are we going to model this, right? The first thing you do is you start modeling each of the properties. So you say new XDSC resource property. You give it a name. So we want to give the name of the resource. So we call it name. And then what type is it? So it can take a set of types. So it's going to be a string. And then what is the attribute? Now resource properties can be of 4 types. Key is important. Every resource needs to have a key property. Now what does that mean? How can I uniquely identify an instance of the resource? A service in Windows can be uniquely identified by its name. So therefore name is the key. A file or registry, for example, can be uniquely identified by its path. So path is going to be the key. Similarly, for a feature, the name of the feature is going to be the key, right? So how do I uniquely identify a service instance? That's going to be key. A required property is a property that you have to mandatorily specify when you define your configuration, right? Like, for example, you want to control the state of a service. So you got to mandatorily specify what the state should be, running or stopped. Write properties are optional. Like you can optionally set up the startup type. So that becomes a write property. And then read are properties that you cannot configure, but it's good to when you get the current state of the system. For example, the easiest thing to know is like a file description. When you're setting the state, you probably cannot change the service description, so you can just read it. Similarly, the last modified time of a file. That's not something that you might want to set, but it's good to read and then use it for other purposes. So these are the 4 different attributes that you can specify on a property. And it is mandatory that every resource has a key property, because that's how you can uniquely identify an instance.
Now, let me just state that for a second. This is something that's actually come up. There's a number of resources where that doesn't make a ton of sense. We're looking into what to do about that. So you might have to manufacture your own key property for the moment. Just work around it. If you've hit this problem, that will help you. If you haven't, don't worry about it. Just remember it if it ever happens to you. But normally, there is, in fact, a name or an identifier of a particular resource. But, something like the OS itself, it's like, okay, there's no property. So that happens. We know it.
Right.
Fix it.
And then you can give a description on what this property means. So I put in some description. And then there is value map, which basically says it's like validate set. What are the set of values that it can take? And values actually tells you which of those it maps to.
And the reason he's going through this right now, there's other ways to do this. You could just do it directly. This is just sort of a way to actually make it a little easier for you, because he's actually generating that MOF. It turns out that for every resource, you have to define a description. There's an internal syntax, and you don't really want to learn that. So this tool kind of helps you get your head around that and generate it for you.
Yeah, I mean, the schema is actually technically defined internally in the MOF syntax. I don't even want to talk about it for a PowerShell crowd. So I'm just saying commandlets. All of us know how to use commandlets. Pretty straightforward, right? Then we auto-generate the MOF. So then you define a property this way. And then, so if I run this, so it defines a property. And then once you have defined your set of properties, so you actually now define a resource. So here is my XDSC resource, the name. So this is going to be the name of the in the MOF world, so which is very different from the friendly name that we use. So there is a name and there is going to be a friendly name. Friendly name is the keyword that you will see in PowerShell. For example, what you see as Windows feature is the friendly name. MSFT_role resource is the actual name that is internally used. So here we will specify name, and the syntax to use there is company name _ the name you want to use. So let's say Xfile, whatever, right? And then I want to give it a friendly name. And then you want to say what are the set of properties you want to use for this resource that we define using new XDSC resource property. So I specify that. Where do you want this created, right? So you specify a path. And then what is the module you want to create this in? So let's say some module name. And class version if you want to version it, but by default it's 1. And then we can create this. So now, the second commandlet, if I run this, it's actually going to create, oops.
Except for the red. By the way, if this ends up sort of saying, oh man, I'm not quite sure how to do this, just reach out to the community. We know how to do this. It's easy to do, right?
There you go. So now this is going to create, if you look at it, the DSC resources and the file underneath it. So here I have the xtest module created. It has the DSC resource structure in there. The MSFT X file resources is in here. And so this is the actual schema. And instead of writing this in MOF, now we actually used a commandlet to generate this. So this tells you, okay, what is the resource, what are the set of properties, what are the attributes, etc. And it also generates the skeleton code. So here are the three functions that we wanted to write: a test, set, and a get. If you look at the test function, it automatically injects what are the attributes it needs, what are the parameters it needs to take. It tells you that you can use write verbose. So all of the verbose messages that we saw when we actually ran the configuration up here. So anything that a resource does a write verbose will show up in this console output when we invoke the configuration. That is something to keep in mind. And it also tells you that a test method is supposed to return a Boolean. Same way for set. Here are the set of parameters you need to take, write verbose, and include this uncomment this line if you think that after configuring the resource, there is a reboot that is required. And get.
Actually, hit that point for just a second. By the way, this is really cool. This is one of the great things that DSC does for you. You don't have to worry about reboots. You just tell it, I want to reboot. And we take care of it. We'll collect them. We'll do them at the right time. We'll handle all the dependencies between reboots. We'll reboot 5 times, 10 times, 2 times, hopefully 0. Hopefully no one needs it. But if you need one, just tell us. And we'll just take care of that, all that mess for you. You don't have to worry about it. And we'll coordinate between everybody who needs their little reboot thing.
Yep. And get is supposed to return a hash table with the current state of the system, and it already automatically dumps you, what should be the hash table syntax. So here is how I wrote for now our service resource. I basically wrote a generator file, which basically has all of these properties that I want to model. So I have a name property, that's the key. Then I have display name, that's a read property. I have the state, which is required, so which means it's mandatory. And here is the value map, right? It can only be running or stopped. Foobar is not an accepted value. And at the end of it, you say new DSC resource. It basically generates the skeleton code for the service. So you run this. Oops. It's going to generate the skeleton code, and you can go ahead and modify that. And this is what it's going to look like. I've just gone in and filled in all of the code. This is something that we will publish at the end of it, so you can download and play with it. This is all vanilla PowerShell. So we take a service, we model what are the properties we want to modify, and then the resource designer generates the skeleton code. We go in and start filling in code. How do I test if it's in a given state? How would I set it to the required state? And then how do I return what the current state is? That's all about how do we write resources. Now, there's an interesting way in which you can write resources as well. And that's using the new notion.
Oh, wow, now I get to play.
That
all
we
right,
put in.
So classes. PowerShell, let's start with PowerShell. PowerShell, I was talking to somebody the other day, and he says, man, PowerShell is like this long tail, right? You've got, at one end of it, a command. I can run a command, whoo, right? And the next, I chain 2 commands together, and I have like a batch thing, a sequence of commands. Then you can do scripts and ifs and whiles. And we get all the way to some system-like programming. You can do an add type from .NET and play around to your heart's content. And we did that on purpose. Right? We need one language to rule them all. No, we have one language so you can actually manage Windows. That was our motivation, because Windows spans this pretty broad spectrum, it turns out. And so you can start way at the one and write commands, and you go all the way up to some systemish-like programming, depending upon what performance you actually need. But it's nice because it's interactive. we've been pushing continually both ends of it, and then DSC is kind of almost an orthogonal axis that takes off into a new direction. But what we did do in this release, and it's again present in the Windows Management Framework 5.0 preview, is enable this wonderful notion of a class. Let's see if I can. Okay, and as you might guess, the way one defines a class is class. You got it? That's it.
No.
That's what you do in PowerShell.
You added an extra S.
Oh, well, yeah, but it's close. There. And so I did, just for fun last night, or yeah, it was last night, is I actually sort of wrote this simple class. This class foo, and you see it's exactly the same. This is just a property. It's just a string, I am, and like all of PowerShell, even though we're introducing new concepts, we keep trying to leverage the stuff we already said before. So if you've never used a validate set, it's really useful on your parameters. But just like a function or a commandlet, advanced function can take a validate set, so can all the properties of a class. We'll automatically make sure that they conform to that property. And then you can go ahead and say, and you can write your own method here also. This is just the method syntax. You don't have to say anything. They're public by default. If you want them private, you put a hidden keyword in front of it right about here. It would look like this. Hid when. All you have to do is learn to type. Okay? And that would make it so somebody couldn't access it. Well, they can. It's not a security feature. It's a useful feature, so to speak. It's a hidden feature. All right. So now this is sort of cool. And then the question is, okay, what do I do with it? How do I invoke it from PowerShell? And again, we use the same basic stuff you're sort of familiar with. Let's see. I should be able to just do a $f equals foo new, right? You just defined a whole new class in PowerShell. It's really useful. It's much simpler. And I'll explain why we're going to do that with respect to DSC resource just a little bit. You can go ahead and get what you want. $f.im, right? All your wonderful tab completion works equals what? Right? And it gives me the error. So the validate stuff really does actually work for me. It's really kind of a nice way of handling errors myself. Or I could say, today, I swear no matter what the report says, I am amazing. I'm going to report that to my boss. And then you can go ahead and call the functions on it. Right. And it says that. Got it? You with me? So it's basic classes, not a big deal. Now, one thing worth noting is two things. First, there's this. It was a choice, but we said in order to use variables inside of the class, you actually have to use the this. So this is required. If you don't have it there, it won't recognize it. It won't recognize $IM. And secondarily, what's interesting is this right here won't work. So Jeffrey, I think, spoke about this a bit in the PowerShell Unplugged session. I'm not going to do a deep dive into classes here. I just want to introduce them to you because I'll show you how they're, because you can write resources in them, and they can avoid that whole moth thing for you. Now, if you do just $this, here, let's while I'm at it, you can comment this out just to prove what I'm saying. We took the liberty of trying to make sure we had a little better, we followed a little more standard programming model, not doing the dynamic lookup, and not actually omitting anything that actually you write on each command line, because it's, again, PowerShell started out, right, as a command line and as a shell script, which made sense, therefore, you had to follow those semantics. In a class world, it's a little different. You're thinking a little different, so we're following a little different model there. And so if I was to run this now, if I was to reinitiate this, go ahead and execute this for us, $f. Let's see, I didn't want to do that. Here a little bit. I'll say $f equals foo new, wonderful, $f.im equals, I don't know, was happy a legal thing? I think I'm happy now. I do $f.write, oops, right.
Tab.
There it is. Nothing comes out, right? Because it just doesn't emit it. So you have to explicitly write. That's one of the nice things about it. All right, enough with classes. So if we wanted to, in fact, write a DSC resource in a class, there's a few additional things you do. It's pretty simple. You still write your class. You still write your class, but what you do is you tag it with a metadata, DSC resource. That's all you need. I am a DSC resource. Woo! That's it. Now we know where you come from. We did that instead of derivation for a few reasons. We won't drill into it. And then if you want to expose some properties, you call them a DSC property. Not too hard to get your head around, because that's what you want to expose to the customer, is a property set. And then if it's a key property, you just say it's a key. You with me? And then you follow the basic syntax for a class. It's a string. Not configurable is just a wonky word. I apologize, but it's there for a reason. I could go into detail. It's essentially a, quote, read-only property, but it's not truly a C# read-only property. So after some discussion, we called it a DSC not configurable, meaning you can't set it during your configuration, right? This is something you can only use from a get. So get is the only thing that will return it. It's not a set or a test. And then, of course, you have the same validate set. You can state whether mandatory, which is they're absolutely required, all the usual. You with me? And then here you just write 3 methods. That's it. You write the get, the test, and the set. And you've got yourself a DSC resource out of the top that automatically does it. Now, it turns out, and there's a few areas where we're just starting this whole class thing. You know this agile programming model? It's kind of good, but it's kind of frustrating sometimes. It's great because we start getting stuff out there to play with. It's kind of frustrating because you start to play with it and you go, well, but I want this other thing, right? Right now, for example, we don't have an easy way for you to access these get, set, and test for your own testing purposes. And so what you end up having to do is write a set of outside functions actually to call them if you want to make them globally accessible. So it's just kind of a nit. I won't drill into all the details of that. There's plenty of blogs on it. And all of this code, all the stuff we're showing you is up on GitHub anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we'll show you exactly where that lands anyway, so you can start playing with it to your heart's content. But again, the notion of a DSC resource, you can go ahead and use it in a class. You get started with that today, and we'll improve that experience over time. Definitely give us feedback on the Connect as you do that.
So here are there are a bunch of slides which we have as best practices. Again, we're going to skim over them. Feel free to use them as reference when you grab the slide deck later on. Okay. We did this. So now let's actually take a quick peek into, and we want everybody to actually follow this practice, which is why we're getting into this, is how do we actually test your resources, make sure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to do, and how do we do that using Pester?
In fact, just before you go down this, when we first published those resources out on the gallery, the first 12 were pretty good, and then we started putting out more, and other people contributed them. We were talking to a few people that says, well, they're great, but I don't know if they're any good, right? I'm not sure I actually want to use them. I like them, but I don't trust them. And so what we realized is, okay, we have to have some more formal way of at least enabling people to do testing and then to download those tests themselves, to run it. The open source is great. And they have a common model where, hey, I ship up my DSC resource, I make it available to Bob, and somebody has already created a Pester test. Their Pester's actual framework, where somebody has already created a test and has gone ahead and validated that resource. Then you can play with it yourself before you actually put it in production, decide if it works for you. Make sense? So the testing really is an important part of it for us to make it useful.
And then trust me, it takes all of 2 minutes to learn Pester, if you know PowerShell.
We're timing you.
By the way, Pester is going to ship in the next version of Windows, and this is one of the community projects that we are taking contributions from the community and actually shipping it in Windows.
And if you missed that, this is huge. So we should just pause, take a deep breath, and realize, I think this is the first time ever Microsoft has allowed us to take something that was open source developed and ship it inside Windows. What do you think, huh? You like that model? We might do more of that. We're going to do more of that. Unless they fire us, but they won't. No, it's pretty great. It's a great model. We're starting some repos already. And this really, publicly we can quiet it down, but this really does belong to Satya, has made a sea change. at Microsoft and enabling us to both reach out to the community, to get input directly, to talk to you more clearly and sooner, and to do things like this, right? We really are about shipping software across all platforms. So DSC, for example, will work against Linux, right? We've already got that working. If somebody went to Mike Kelly's talk, he drilled into that a little bit. So it's an ongoing effort. This is just the beginning, but this is a great start. And you get it. And you are the first ones that can take advantage of this whole approach of open source in Microsoft by using Pester. I'm done with my speech.
Yep. My 2 minutes is gone.
That's right. Hey, you're done. How come you didn't explain it?
Okay, so there is this new fixture commandlet in Pester. And when you run that, it essentially, maybe I might want to do a dash. There's no dash force. Never mind, the file exists. So it basically creates two files, a script file and a test file. So if you open the script file, it generates a skeleton. So I said new fixture dash name end service. So it puts in skeleton code function. So I'm just adding something here. Let's put, keep it at 1. Right? I'm just adding some code. And then there is the test file that is being generated. So let's open that. And what does this have? Essentially 3 things, right? This is all auto-generated. So it basically imports whatever functions that we have defined in the script file. And then here are the concepts in Pester. Describe, right? Describe is essentially used to define a context, or in other words, you can think of it like a test suite. So you always start with a describe, and you say describe, you give it a description, and that becomes your test suite. And then there is a script block. And this is like any script block in PowerShell. And then it is basically the test case, invoke test. So it is the name, and then you give a description for the test. And then there is a script block that actually contains the code. And then finally in here I'm calling the function, I'm piping it to, I'm going to validate, should be 1, right?
So this is going to run end service and make sure that it's 1 at the end. Is that what it's going to do?
So it's going to run end service, and it's going to make sure that it's going to emit 1. So you can check, should be for strings, integers. You can check if an exception is being thrown. There are like different ones. But essentially the idea is you run something, pipe it to should be whatever is the result you want to validate.
And I could have passed parameters to end service in some variety?
Yep.
Okay.
So I'll show a full example. But this is, in a nutshell, what you kind of got to learn about for PowerShell, right? There is describe that describes what your test suite is going to look like, and that's a context. So look at it. This is a script block. So anything that you define is available within that script block. And then it is a test case within that. Again, defined within a script block, so that has a context. And this is how you verify. Pipe something should be whatever you wanted to verify. It's simple. That's all it takes to learn and write test case in PowerShell. In Pester, right?
That was the 2 minutes.
Yeah.
All right.
So now, let me go in here. Let's try to invoke. So how do I run a test case? You basically go to the folder, and you say invoke Pester. And it goes, finds all the Pester test cases, and just runs them. So I just say invoke Pester. And that's it. So it is going to describing end service, and it's going to run does something useful test case. So now how do we actually take this and use this for testing resources? And that's the important piece we want to look at, right? Okay, so here is the test module where we have the resources. So here is the Pester generated file, and what I'm doing here is I am importing the module. So I say import module of wherever we had the code for the service resource. So basically you just have to import it in the Pester generated script file. That's step 1. And step 2 is when you want to actually write those tests. Now you basically go ahead and start writing your tests. Now a couple of interesting things to note here, right? You have something like before all, after all, or before each, after each. Those are 2 other constructs in Pester. Those are script blocks that get run. Before all is like before all of the tests. Before each is before every test. And after is at the end of them.
So it gives me a chance to clean up and to set up.
So it gives you a chance to set up an environment, it gives you a chance to clean up. And then here is a simple test case, right? I'm invoking a test service, I'm saying start service, and I'm calling test target resource, passing the name, I'm checking if the state is running, I started the service. So pipe would say it should be true, because test is expected to return true or false. Is it in the desired state or not? So this is how you validate it. Now here is another interesting thing. Now, I want to keep doing this for various states. What happens if my service is running? I'm looking for it to be running. What if the service is running? It needs to be stopped. So basically, all of these combinations. So instead of writing over and over the same test cases again, I basically define a hash table here. Here is the name of my service. Here is supposed to be its current state. This is what the state I wanted to compare it to be. And this is my expected result. So I basically create a hash table and look at how I have defined my test cases here. So it takes a param block. The test case takes a param block with those, and here are the tokens. So I say a test if service with that name is in this state when actual state is this. Right? So they're tokenized. And then you say you pass as test cases the hash table. And so for every entry in the hash table, you get a new test case automatically generated. So instead of instead of writing separate test cases for comparing each of those, I basically create a hash table, write once, and pass the hash table as a test case. So those are some of the interesting things you can do in Pestle. And again, this is going to be available, so feel free to download and then play around with it.
And again, this is a place where you want to start simple, then grow it, right? And then grab a few examples, start playing with it, see how it works for you, adjust it for your needs. The key is to start playing because it's a pretty nice framework.
So now I go in here and I say invoke pester. So it's going to run all of my test cases. And notice here you also have question mark, which is, okay, it's a test case that I'm yet to implement the functionality, so I'm going to skip it. Or if you know of a test case that's going to fail, you can mark it. So here you say this is pending because it's not yet implemented. So this is how you test your resources using pester. And if you look back, and when we define the classes, we define certain helper functions. It's because those helper functions can now be accessed via pester, and therefore that's how you can test your individual methods in your class-based DSC resource. That's a temporary workaround. We are working towards fixing it, but I can't promise on when that's going to be available. So again, here are some best practices for a future reference on how to use pester test cases. We have 7 more minutes to go. I'm going to quickly talk about but not show. It's going to be available later for you to download and play with. We have this new tool called Script Analyzer. And what it does is all of the best practices that you want to enforce on a script, Script Analyzer will basically, it's like FX Corp for scripts, right? It will scan your scripts and find out, okay, here are the best practices that you have missed, right? And those are categorized as based on severity. Is it just an information or is it an error? You got to abide by this. And you can define your own custom rules and you can play with it. So this is something useful. This is, again, this is a completely open source developed model for us. It's available on GitHub, so you can download, you can contribute if you are interested. And this basically links against your scripts, and it can also link against your DSC resources and make sure that all of the recommended best practices are actually being enforced.
And this is something we'll grow over time. And as we start to publish, we're going to talk about publishing in a little bit, but over time we'll probably have different categories of published resources. Certainly passing the basic script analyzer, having pester tests would put you in a better category, so to speak, a more trusted category than having none of those. Does that make sense? Because people, when they're downloading that find-module I was showing you, you want to be able to find module and actually know, okay, do you have tests, right? Is it past the script analyzer? So this is the kind of stuff sort of start getting your head around.
Yep. So now let's take a quick peek at how do we actually publish resources.
Well, yeah, now they've done all the work of creating them, they ought to be able to share them. At least I want to use them.
Okay. So now, let's first look at what are all the different properties when I actually find them, right? So let's say when I find module X administration, it takes a while. So you look at it, there's a name, there's a version, description, who the author is, what is the license URI, project URI, etc. And it can also have a bunch of tags. Look at this. It's a DSC resource. It's a PS module. You can have whatever tags you wanted. Now, some of these fields, they always get populated from the module manifest. Like, for example, who is the author? What is the description? What is the version? These fields always get populated from your module manifest. But some fields, like, you want to specify a tag. Now, sorry. So you look at publish module command. I can actually specify tags at the time of publishing.
So later on, when somebody does a find module, they can actually say -tag and actually find your stuff.
But you can also specify tags within the module manifest. And that is what we generally recommend, right? So here is a generated module manifest. It has all of these fields. It has a name, version. This is something useful that you already know about. But for the purpose of publishing, we have added this PS data. And here you can go and specify tags. You can specify license URI. You can specify pointers to a release notes, etc. And all of this are picked up during the publishing time, and they are being used as metadata. When people find module, you can find that. And as again with PowerShell, there's no rocket science here. You can think and type. So if you want to publish a module, you say publish module, right? Think, type. You can either specify the name of a module if it's in the module path. So I can say -name if I have it in the module path. Or you can specify the path to the module, the folder. Both of them works. Now, one other important parameter that you got to specify is the NuGet API key. So right now, the gallery is in a limited preview. What it means is anybody can consume. It's open for consumption, but we have a whitelist of contributors who can actually contribute to the gallery. Soon, we will be making it public, which means anybody can contribute and anybody can consume. But right now, it is in a limited preview, so you'll have to talk to us to enable you to publish. And then once you are registered in the gallery would give you an API key, which is basically a GUID. And then you get that API key. So I can actually quickly show you. Never mind my. So you go to your profile. This is the API key. So you get the API key. And then you can specify it here. And then you're good to go. You can publish whichever module you want to. Right? So let me try publishing here. Module.
Woo! It's published.
It's published. It's published
Awesome.
into my local gallery here.
All right.
So that's all it takes to publish. So we're running out of time.
Perfect.
The last thing, I think we have spoken enough about our open source. If you want to look at what are the projects we have open sourced, what are the DSC resources in particular we've open sourced, go to github.com/PowerShell. And here is a reference slide on how we maintain the branching structure, etc. But if you
There'll
go
be a test on this before you can leave. No, it's a basic notion. It says we have a main tree and then a dev tree. Those three continue all the way. You guys branch off the dev tree, and then you do a pull request back. It's just a basic, standard, pretty open source model. It's not actually bad at all. It looks more complicated than it is.
Yeah, you can go to our GitHub page, and you have all of the details. The contribution guidelines are in there. And at the end of this session, now most likely not today because I have a flight to catch, by Monday, we will have this tagged on all of the demo and more, whatever we saw here, will be published in our gallery. So this is the piece of code that you got to run to download the demos, right? We'll tag them with the session number. So there are going to be a set of modules, and you just find them, install them with what you learned today. You'll have all of the demos, and you can play around with them.
So the final point is evolve, right? Change, right? Come with this. get to configuration as code, moving down the DevOps path. Go ahead, take your PowerShell expertise. You've already spent so long developing. It's been fun anyway, but it's a great expertise. Grow it into the desired state configuration world by creating resources, by first creating configurations. Use everybody else's work on the gallery. Do find module, install the preview, do a find module, see what you can use, create your little configuration. Start simple, right? Do your services. That's really it. Thank you very much. We appreciate you. Okay.